The old redwood house stood as a grim sentinel deep within the whispering pines, a relic of a darker time. Its Victorian spires clawed at a leaden sky, and the windows, like blinded eyes, stared vacantly at the overgrown path leading to its door. To the 5 friends who had just graduated, it was the ultimate adventure, a perfect weekend getaway far from parents and responsibility. They had all heard the local legend of the Redwood family, a tale of madness and bloodshed whispered around campfires. But to them, it was just that. A story. Sarah, the group's pragmatic and intuitive historian, had been the most enthusiastic. It's not just a ghost story, she'd argued, her eyes alight with excitement. The architecture is a perfect example of late 19th century design. The history is palpable. Mike, ever the brave and impulsive one, had immediately agreed, seeing it as a challenge. A weekend in a murder house? Hell yes. Nothing a few beers can't handle. Jessica, the group's vibrant and optimistic heart, was already planning the Instagram photos. It'll be so atmospheric, spooky, and fun. David, the cautious and logical tech wizard, had been the lone voice of reason, his brow furrowed. There's a reason that place is condemned, the structural integrity alone, but his protests were drowned out by the group's excitement. Lastly, there was Leah, quiet and intensely observant, who said little but felt the heavy aura of the place from the moment they parked their car a mile down the dirt road. The first day was everything they'd hoped for. They explored the dusty, decaying rooms, laughing nervously at the grotesque Victorian-era wallpaper peeling from the walls and the ominous portraits of stern-faced ancestors that seemed to follow their every move. Mike found an old rusted axe in the basement, which he brandished playfully, making Jessica shriek with mock terror. As dusk fell, they set up their sleeping bags in the grand ballroom, the largest and most intact space, and lit a dozen candles against the encroaching darkness. The wind moaned through cracks in the walls, sounding like faint pained cries, but they dismissed it as their imaginations, fueled by cheap wine and the thrill of the unknown. It was on the second night that the fun ended. The change was subtle, at first. A door they were certain was open would be found firmly closed. A cold draft would slice through a room with no windows. Then came the noises. Not the wind, but distinct, deliberate sounds. The soft, dragging shuffle of feet on the floor above, when they were all together downstairs. A faint, melodic humming of a nursery rhyme that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. David's equipment, which he had meticulously set up to monitor the house's temperature and electromagnetic fields, began to behave erratically, spiking wildly before dying completely, along with all their phones, cutting them off from the world. Fear, cold and sharp, began to replace their excitement. "It's just the house settling," Mike said. But his voice lacked its usual bravado. His hand tightened around the fire poker he'd taken to carrying. The first real incident happened to Jessica. She had gone to use the makeshift bathroom they'd designated in a small downstairs pantry. Her blood-curdling scream brought the others running. They found her backed into a corner, trembling violently, pointing a shaking finger at the far wall. Etched into the thick dust as if by an invisible finger were the words, "You are my guests now." Panic truly set in. This was no longer a game. David immediately insisted they leave, but when Mike tried the massive front door, it wouldn't budge. It wasn't locked. It was as if it had been fused shut with the frame. Every window they tried was similarly sealed, the glass feeling unnaturally solid like stone. That's when the whispers began. They were faint at first, layered over each other, a chorus of malice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. "Stay. Play. You'll never leave." The temperature in the ballroom plummeted. Their breath misted in the air, and the candle flames guttered and died, plunging them into an absolute suffocating blackness. A single light flickered on from the top of the grand staircase. A figure stood there, silhouetted against a sickly, green luminescence. It was tall and gaunt, its movements a series of jerky, unnatural twitches. It was not fully solid, flickering like a bad film projection, but the hatred that radiated from it was terrifyingly real. This was no legend. This was the remnant of Elias Redwood, the patriarch who had butchered his family in this very house a century ago, and his spirit was far from resting. The fight for survival had begun. The entity did not attack them outright. Instead, it began to toy with them, using the house itself as a weapon. The floorboards in the hallway splintered and gave way under Mike's feet, and only David's quick reflexes saved him from a fall onto the jagged rubble below. Portraits flew from the walls, their heavy frames becoming deadly projectiles. They barricaded themselves in the library, but the books on the shelves began to vibrate and then shoot out like bullets, their pages razor sharp. Sarah, trying to think, remembered a snippet from the local lore she'd researched. The stories said he was bound to the house by his deeds. He can't leave, and he can't stand to see others leave. His weakness is something from his life. Something that reminded him of his humanity. But finding a relic of humanity in a house of pure evil was a near impossible task. They decided to risk splitting up, a decision that felt foolish even as they made it. David and Leah would try to find a way to break a window from the outside by throwing something through it, while Sarah, Mike, and Jessica would search the master bedroom for any personal effects. It was a trap. As David and Leah navigated the dark kitchen searching for a heavy tool, the cupboard doors began to slam open and shut violently. A cloud of cutlery rose into the air, knives pointing at them like accusing fingers before shooting forward. David shoved Leah behind a heavy table, taking a deep gash on his arm. They were pinned down. Upstairs, the other three found the master bedroom. The air was thick with the smell of old blood and decay. In the center of the room, on a dust-covered dresser, sat a single small music box. As Jessica reached for it, the door slammed shut behind them. The figure of Elias Redwood materialized, from the shadows, more solid now, his features contorted in a rictus of rage. He lunged. Mike met the charge with the fire poker, swinging it with all his might. It passed through the entity, but the thing shrieked, a sound of pure psychic agony, and recoiled. It was not immune to their resistance. The struggle was frantic, a chaotic dance of swinging metal and flickering cold light. Sarah grabbed the music box and shoved it into her backpack. "The window!" she yelled. Mike turned and, with a final desperate heave, smashed the fire poker through the glass. This time it shattered. The spell was broken. "Go! Now!" he screamed at Jessica, helping her through the jagged opening onto the roof below. But as Sarah moved to follow, an invisible force grabbed her ankle, yanking her back into the room. Mike turned to help her, but the door burst open, and a wave of freezing energy threw him back against the wall. His head connected with the solid wood with a sickening crack, and he slid to the floor unconscious. Downstairs, David and Leah, hearing the commotion and the shattering glass, made a break for it. They burst out of the kitchen door into the cold night air, not stopping until they were 100 yards from the house. Gasping for breath, they turned back, expecting to see Sarah and Mike behind them. They saw only Jessica, sobbing and bleeding from a cut on her face, stumbling towards them. "Where are they?" David demanded, his voice tight with fear. Jessica could only shake her head, tears streaming down her face. He has them. The house has them." Back inside, Sarah came to in the basement. She was tied to a heavy old chair. Mike was opposite her, still out cold. The entity, Elias Redwood, stood between them. No longer a flickering silhouette, but a horrifyingly detailed apparition. His clothes were stained with ectoplasmic gore, and his eyes were black voids of hatred. "You thought you could steal from me?" His voice hissed, not in the air, but directly inside her mind. "You are part of the house now. Your fear will feed me. Your souls will join the chorus." Sarah, her heart hammering against her ribs, fought to stay calm. She remembered the music box in her backpack, which lay discarded in a corner, the thing that reminded him of his humanity. It was their only chance. With a strength born of sheer terror, she rocked the chair, inching it towards the backpack. The entity watched, amused by her struggle. "There is no hope," it whispered. "There is only the house." Her fingers brushed the canvas of the bag. Straining, she managed to hook a finger through the zipper and pull it open. The music box tumbled out onto the dirty floor. The entity's amusement vanished. It let out a shriek of fury and lunged for her. But Sarah, with a final, desperate lunge, kicked the chair forward and her foot came down on the small box, cracking it open. A faint, tinkling melody began to play, a sweet, simple lullaby. The effect was instantaneous. Elias Redwood froze. The monstrous rage on his face flickered, and for a single breathtaking moment, it was replaced by an expression of profound sorrow and loss. He was remembering. He was human. The moment was brief, but it was enough. The house's hold weakened. The ropes binding Sarah felt less substantial. She struggled free just as Mike began to stir. "Mike! Run!" she screamed, grabbing his arm and hauling him to his feet. They stumbled up the basement stairs, the entity's agonized roars echoing. Behind them, the lullaby still playing over the sound of its fury. They found the front door slightly ajar, the seal broken. They burst out into the rain-soaked night, not stopping, not looking back, their lungs burning as they ran down the path towards the distant glow of their car's headlights. They didn't stop until they were miles away, huddled in an all-night diner, shaking uncontrollably as police and ambulances were called. They were alive, but they were forever changed. The Redwood legend wasn't a story, it was a warning, and they had learned its terrible truth firsthand. They had gone seeking a fun weekend adventure and had found themselves in a vicious, brutal fight for survival against a past that refused to stay dead, in a house that was not a home but a hungry, eternal prison. The five friends never should have ventured into the forgotten sanatorium. It wasn't on any map, just a local nightmare whispered about in the town below, a place where the air was wrong and the silence was a physical weight. They had come for the thrill for the story to tell back at university. But the stories didn't capture the feeling of the place the way the rusted iron gates seemed to swallow the fading light. Whole Leo the skeptic carried a heavy flashlight, its beam cutting a shaky path. Through the oppressive dark Sarah, his girlfriend, held his arm, her breath misting in the sudden cold. They were followed by Chloe, the history buff who saw a tragic past where others saw only decay. Ben, the jock who mocked their fear until the first door slammed shut on its own, and Mia, the quiet one who felt the building's hunger the moment they stepped inside. It wasn't haunted in the way they expected. There were no ghosts, no chains rattling in the hall. Instead, it was the building itself, the way the corridors seemed to shift and change behind them, the way the surgical theaters were still spotless, gleaming under their lights, while the patient rooms crumbled into dust. They found medical charts filled with frantic, incoherent scribbles about a project to cure melancholy by carving it out. The first thing they all noticed was the cold, a deep, invasive chill that settled into their bones. Then the smell, not dust and decay, but the sharp, sterile scent of antiseptic and something else, something metallic underneath. "We should go back," Leo said, his voice too loud in the swallowing quiet. But the door they had entered through was gone, replaced by a solid wall of stained concrete panic. A sharp and sudden thing began to flutter in Sarah's chest. "This isn't funny." Ben. Who moved the door? No one had. They were trapped. They moved deeper into the sanatorium, their footsteps echoing in a way that felt wrong, as if the sound was being absorbed and then thrown back at them from the wrong directions. They found a central hall lined with broken chairs, and at the far end a single elevator, its doors standing open, an invitation to the dark below. "The power has been out for 50 years, Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. "Why is that open?" A low hum answered her, a vibration that thrummed through the soles of their shoes. The lights above the elevator door flickered and glowed a sickly green. "It's for us," Mia said, her eyes wide with a terror the others didn't yet understand. "It's waiting," they refused. The elevator's silent call, choosing instead a staircase that spiraled down into the foundations. The air grew thicker, harder to breathe. The metallic smell was stronger here. It was the smell of old blood. The basement was a maze of pipes and rusted machinery. But at its heart they found it a single room sealed behind a heavy reinforced door that was now wide open. Inside was not a storage closet, but a perfect circle of absolute blackness, a hole in the floor of the world. There were no walls, no bottom, just an emptiness that seemed to pulse with a silent rhythm. Leo shone his light into the void, and the beam didn't illuminate, it was simply consumed. They all felt it. Then a pull, a terrible yearning from the abyss. It wanted them to come. Closer. Ben backed away first. No, hell no. This is some messed up industrial. The door behind them slammed shut with a finality that shook the room. The hum grew louder now, a deafening drone that filled their heads. They were trapped with it. The first? Change was in Ben. His bravado melted away, replaced by a raw animal fear. His eyes darted wildly, and he began to scratch at his own arms, as if trying to dig something out of his skin. "I can hear it," he mumbled, his voice cracking. "It's in my head. It doesn't like the noise. Get it out. Get it out." He suddenly turned and sprinted, not for the door but for the blackness, throwing himself into the void without a sound. He was gone. His scream never came. The remaining four recoiled in horror. The thing in the pit wasn't just a place, it was an intelligence. It was feeding on them. The lights in the room, the emergency strips on the floor flared to life, burning a painful chemical white. The hum shifted pitch, becoming a screech of feedback that felt like needles in their brains. Sarah clapped her hands over her ears, but it was inside her. Leo's flashlight exploded in a shower of glass and plastic, plunging them into a darkness broken only by the faint glow from the abyssits. The fear, Chloe screamed. Over the noise, her historical certainty shattered. It's what it wants, it's what it eats. The realization was worse than any monster. Their terror wasn't a reaction. It was the point. It was the meal. Mia, who had been silent, sank to her knees. "I don't want to be afraid anymore," she whispered, and the void seemed to lean toward her voice. She simply went limp, her eyes rolling back in her head as her consciousness was siphoned away, drawn out into the nothingness. She was empty. 3 left. The door was still shut. Leo threw his weight against it again and again until his shoulder was bruised and bloody. It didn't move. The screeching in their minds intensified, showing them things: Leo's deepest shame, a mistake that had hurt someone he loved; Sarah's phobia of being buried alive; Chloe's fear of losing her mind. They were being flayed open emotionally and mentally. Sarah couldn't take it. She started clawing at the floor, trying to dig her way out, her nails tearing and bleeding. She was sobbing, screaming, that the walls were closing in, that the dirt was filling her mouth. She wasn't in the room anymore. She was in her own personal hell. She collapsed, choking on air that wasn't there. Leo grabbed her, holding her tight as she shook and trembled. He looked at Chloe, his eyes desperate. "We have to stop being afraid." How she cried. "How do we do that?" The answer came not from them but from the thing itself. The screeching stopped, replaced by a new sound, a soft rhythmic clicking. It was the sound of a film projector. A grainy black and white image flickered to life on the far wall. It showed them happy. It showed them years from now. Leo and Sarah married with a child. Chloe, a celebrated professor. They were smiling, laughing, living. The images were a lie. Of course, a beautiful, cruel lie designed to show them exactly what they would never have. It was the final torture. The hope that killed Chloe let out a broken sound and walked toward the image, her hand outstretched. Leo tried to stop her, but she shook her head. "It's better than this," she said, and stepped into the projection and was gone. Leo held Sarah's now still body. She was catatonic, her mind broken by the fear. He was alone with the void. The clicking stopped. The images vanished. There was only the silence and the pull. He stopped fighting. He stopped feeling. He let go of his fear, not with courage, but with utter hopelessness. He accepted the void, and the second he did, the door behind him clicked open. The void didn't want his resignation. It wanted his struggle. It wanted the fight. It had no taste for despair. He dragged Sarah's limp form through the door and up the stairs. The sanatorium was just a building again, crumbling and dark. He didn't stop until he was out under the cold night, air gasping. He never told the authorities what happened inside. They wouldn't have believed him. He left Sarah at a hospital where she remained staring at a wall that only she can see. Leo knows the truth now. The sanatorium is not haunted by the past. It is a mouth, and the fear is what it eats. He can still feel the pull sometimes in the quiet moments, a faint hum at the edge of his hearing, a reminder that it is still down there in the dark, waiting patiently for its next meal. 3 a.m. Marissa led a simple life: work, dinner, bed. Her small house on the edge of town was quiet, almost too quiet, but she convinced herself she liked it that way. No drama, no stress, just silence. Only lately, that silence evolved into more. The quaint silence she knew became an entity entirely its own, and the life she'd known was shifting, changing into something she could never have been prepared for. It began with harmless, simple things. A spoon left out she had not used. A chair, pulled slightly from the table. But then the night started, 3 in the morning every time. Her eyes snapped open in the dark, her heart already racing as if her body knew before she did. The silence was thick and palpable. It was not empty. It was waiting. Sometimes she caught the barest flicker of movement in the corner of her vision, shadows retreating just out of sight. Then the sounds came, a faint clicking like knuckles popping in the hallway, the slow, wet drag of something moving along the wall. Once, as she froze under her blankets, she swore she felt hot breath on her face, carrying the stench of soil and decay. The house, the one she'd grown to know and love, was not hers anymore. It belonged to whatever shared it with her. The night it revealed itself, she woke to the shape at the foot of her bed. Its body was gaunt, skin stretched so thin over its bones it tore in places, weeping dark fluid. Its limbs bent wrong, arms dragging like stumps of gristle along the floor. The jaw hung loose and broken, skin split at the corners, saliva and blood dripping down its chest like thick rivers. Its ribs heaved with each breath, cracking loudly as though the bones themselves were splintering and breaking. She screamed and hurled her lamp, the light exploding across the room. But the glow only exposed the horror. Its skin writhed with tiny movements beneath, like things were crawling under the surface. Its tongue, long and swollen, slid out from its broken mouth, slapping wetly against its chest before curling back in. Each step forward was accompanied by tearing sounds, muscles ripping as it forced its warped body closer. Marissa tried to scramble out of bed, but it lunged. Its hand clamped her shoulder, the fingers too sharp, puncturing flesh like knives. She shrieked as hot blood soaked her nightshirt. The other hand raked across her ribs, nails snapping off in her skin, leaving jagged pieces lodged deep. It pressed its face close, its torn jaw opening wide until the tendon snapped, the mouth unhinging into a gaping wound of teeth and blood. She fought, clawing at its face, her nails peeling chunks of skin that came away with ease. Beneath, raw, muscle twitched and bled. The creature did not flinch. It fed. Its teeth sank into her shoulder, crunching through bone with a sickening crack. She screamed, blood spraying across the wall as it tore free, ripping away flesh in a mouthful of red and sinew. The sound of it chewing was worse than the pain, a wet grinding gnash that filled the room. It bit again, ripping through her collarbone, tearing muscle loose in thick strands, swallowing pieces of her whole. The last thing she saw before her vision blurred was its chest splitting down the center, ribs snapping outward with sharp cracks. Inside was no heart, no lungs, no organs at all, only a cavity of slick meat and gnashing teeth. It dragged her forward, her legs kicking weakly, and shoved her into its open chest. The teeth inside tore into her abdomen, ripping skin apart in strips, spilling her insides onto the floor as it pulled more of her inside. She screamed once, high and broken, before her throat was clamped down on by rows of grinding bone that sheared through her windpipe. Her body convulsed as it dragged her deeper, her ribcage cracking under the pressure. Blood poured across the sheets, painting the walls in sprays as pieces of her were torn loose and devoured. Her final moment of clarity was the sound of her own spine snapping in two as the thing swallowed her down into the pit of its body. When it was finished, the bedroom was unrecognizable. The sheets were soaked through, dripping red onto the floorboards below. Flesh clung in torn pieces to the walls, drying already in the cool air. Bones, cracked and splintered, lay scattered at the foot of the bed, some gnawed down to fragments. The air was hot with the stench of blood, a thick metallic fog that clung to every surface. The creature stood in the middle of the room, twitching as though its body did not know what to do with itself. It was swollen now. Its skin stretched tighter than before, slick with gore that ran down its chest in streams. From inside its ribs came the sound of chewing and grinding, as if the chest cavity itself was still feeding long after the mouth had stopped. A muffled crack echoed from within its torso, and for a moment a pale hand pushed outward against the skin before being yanked back into the meat. Then the house went still. The creature slowly receded, folding itself into the shadows, its dripping body sliding into the dark as if it had never been there at all. The bedroom was silent again, except for the occasional drip of blood hitting the floor. Hours passed, and then days. The phone on the counter rang again and again, unanswered. Mail piled up at the door. The world outside went on, but inside, the house, the silence remained, thicker than ever, waiting. And when night fell and the house was swallowed in darkness, the silence grew hungry once more.